Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Altishan, Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Case Cascade Legal. And today we have attorney Taylor Crabill to talk about combating workplace discrimination when navigating a family law matter. Taylor, how you doing today?
Doing well, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing well. We got some snow, which in Oregon is, like almost never. So it's kind of fun. But before we start in, I just kind of want to also ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into being basically an employee discrimination attorney, and what made you do that?
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, we practice employment law and we represent almost exclusively employees who've been discriminated at work, retaliated, sexual harassment, sexual assault type claims, people who haven't been paid their correct wages, whether it be overtime or some other wages, commissions, other compensation as well. We also do whistleblower type cases for employees who will complain about something illegal that's happening in the workplace. So that's sort of a broad overview of what we do here at the firm. How I got into it was before I went to law school, I wanted to make sure that I was choosing a career that I understood, and so I went and I worked as a paralegal for 2 years before going into law school. And I worked at a firm in New York City that does the same thing that my firm does now, plaintiff side employment law firm. And so I got really familiar with the laws and got to see how the work that we were doing at the firm really helped people in a tough spot, right? Losing your job can be a huge punch in the gut. You're losing compensation many times, almost every time you're losing health care. And so being able to sort of work hard, get them a result so that they could put that difficult time in their life behind them was pretty rewarding. And I've decided to make a career of it.
Oh, I love it. This is perfect for you to talk about this. I'm going to ask kind of I don't know, what I would call it, discrimination for dummies question.
Sure.
And, what do you mean by discrimination? And is all discrimination illegal?
Yeah, fair enough. So the law recognizes certain characteristics or categories of that are protected under the law, right? If you just don't get along with your boss, they happen to be a jerk. Unfortunately, we've all experienced that in our lives. The law doesn't protect anything about that, right? But if someone's acting towards you in that sort of way because you're a woman, because you're pregnant, because you have a disability, you're over 40 years old, because of your religion, your skin color, your race, those are some of the protected characteristics under some of the federal laws, and then also more municipal or local laws, state laws as well. So typically, this discrimination needs to be associated with some sort of protected characteristic under the law in order for there to be protections.
Then let's start because we're a family law heavy law firm, and so let's start with that sort of the main things that kind of happen, and one of them is divorce, and that's like hard to go through no matter what, without having to worry about your job, isn't it? But does that necessarily mean it's subject to being discriminated against?
It could be, right? If you're dealing with a divorce situation, maybe it's the case where one of the parents was the primary caregiver for children, for example, if there are children in the relationship. And so let's say, I guess maybe more typically it's been the woman, but let's say there's a wife who's going back now to work because after a divorce, so she's re-entering the workplace. So there are protections against discrimination based on pregnancy under certain, state and local laws, marital status or, status as a caregiver. So an employer can't discriminate against you in the hiring process, can't take those into consideration in denying you employment. Now, those situations are often very difficult to prove because, you submit an application, maybe you go for an interview, you don't really have the information from behind the scenes that dictates that situation. So, failure to hire cases can be very difficult. But especially when someone's entering back into the workplace, being able to understand your rights gives you a leg up if something starts to go wrong, right? If you start to sense that you're being discriminated against because someone learns that you have young children, maybe that didn't come up before, right? Or, learns that you were recently divorced and for whatever reason has some sort of animus against people who've gone through divorce. Being able then to take the steps to protect yourself should something bad happen, which most cases is a termination, is just so important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of tough because, even during a divorce, you may have to go to court. You may have to go to mediation. You may have to go to some parenting classes. There's a lot of things that are already in the way. So it's nice to know that, at least in some cases, you can have some sort of protection from just, well, hold on, you got divorced and now I have to deal with you and all the stuff that happens. Maybe there is some protection, but it's not like some of these other big protections, is it? The one of the other big ones, and it comes to us a lot, is age discrimination and the fear of it, because we have estate planning that we do, and a lot of people are at that age where they're trying to figure their estate. They are, figuring out what their social security is going to be, what their retirement income is going to be, and a lot of times, it's their job is part of it. And it's hard to do it if you're going to face discrimination, just because you're older.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately that is part of the is part of what happens in the workplace is the certain age discrimination. And the laws protect people who are 40 years or older from this sort of discrimination. And like most employment law cases, it's a situation where there's usually not direct evidence, right? The employer's most of the time not saying, hey, listen, time to fire everyone over 60 or everyone over 50, right? Very, very rare that that happens. More often than not, it's more circumstantial evidence that will go to support an age discrimination case, right? If the employer starts sending out messaging, we need new energy, we need a fresh start. If older employees start to see that younger employees are getting their clients or, certain projects that they used to get or that should go to someone more experienced, again, that could be a sign, another a piece of circumstantial evidence that goes to help prove the discriminatory intent behind what they're doing, right? Inappropriate jokes or comments at work, like, "Hey, when are you going to retire?" Or, "You've been here for so long, like time to hang it up," right? Those sort of things very, very clearly show that age is on the mind, and the employer can't be making decisions um, around that category.
Yeah, that's you brought up that harassment, and a lot of people, that I talk to think that discrimination just means, oh, they fired me because.
Right.
But being harassed, isn't that also covered under those laws?
Yeah, sure. I guess the most typical sort of situation people are familiar with is you get fired, right? Hey, I announced I was pregnant, or, I've now reached a certain age, and I noticed a shift in how I've been treated, and it ultimately led to my termination. But if you're still employed, there are protections from what's called a hostile work environment, right? And so there still needs to be the connection to some sort of protected characteristic, right? Again, just because your boss is a jerk doesn't necessarily mean that there's some sort of protections, right? But if you can show, hey, listen, every single day I'm getting harassed by these like really inappropriate jokes about the fact that, I happen not to be as young as everyone else here, I'm a certain age. They keep doing this on a regular basis, then that might sort of rise to the level of something that would be actionable, even if you're still employed and you hadn't been fired.
The When I was kind of researching and looking this up, one of the things that I got from your website was the new laws about women and pregnancy.
Mhm.
And that's fascinating because there's more than one law now that covers pregnancy and the entire sort of range of pregnancy, non-pregnancy. Um, it was fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that that's a huge issue, especially as people come out of divorces, and it just I'm gonna have a baby. I can't, no one wants to hire me.
Yeah, yeah, or even when you're still employed. Unfortunately, if we've seen a number of pregnancy discrimination cases at our firm, and oftentimes, shockingly enough, the women tend to be some of the top performers in the group. But there's this sort of thought or preconceived notion that you're going to get pregnant, you're no longer going to put the job first, you're going to have other responsibilities. Well, there's countless examples of people who've pregnant or who have children that are certainly can be top performers. Um, so yes, when you're seeing that sort, it's nice to see a progression over time with additional protections related to pregnancy because that's a reality of the world that we live in, right? And employers should be prepared to adjust and be able to manage those sort of situations because they're inevitable, right?
Yeah.
Um, and really. One thing I would stress is for either someone who's dealing with a divorce and maybe they're pregnant when that's happening, or they're maybe they've just given birth and that sort of divorce has just happened and they're back in the workforce maybe more than they were before or for the first time in a long time. It's to really understand that if you start to see a change in how you're treated or inappropriate comments coming up is that you have options, right? And one of the options is to make what's called a protected complaint. And so if you're putting something in writing to HR or supervisor, someone at the company who can do something about it, and the email typically looks something like, "Hey, I believe I'm being discriminated against because of my pregnancy or because I have small children, or because I was recently divorced, and here is A, B, C reason why." That starts to be what the law will consider a protected activity. And if the employer then fires you or takes some other sort of adverse action against you in retaliation for that, then you may have an additional retaliation claim under the law. So there are those other protections out there.
What about just something like, you know, a pregnant woman needs to lactate, needs to express
Mhm.
milk, needs to do those kinds of things. And can the employer just say, well, you're on your own? Or do they fall into that kind of accommodation thing like ADA rules are?
Yeah, there certainly could be an ADA aspect of it in terms of requesting an accommodation, right? Oftentimes, even during pregnancy, right, women struggle with certain, immense changes to their bodies that cause them to be sick or to be fatigued more easily, right? Need 10, 15-minute breaks or to be able to sit for a period of time before, jumping back in. And so it can certainly be the case that you can work with your employer to come up with an accommodation that helps you manage that sort of situation. There are even specific laws on the books now related to, women who need to pump and having a designated room for the woman to be able to do that, right? Not just like the janitor's closet, right? But like a specific room that has, a certain setup, a certain amount of lighting, to be able to provide a comfortable environment for a woman to be able to do that and then be able to go back to work.
Kind of a topic that's topical right now is um, women who don't want to be pregnant,
Sure.
either getting an abortion. Um, is that status um, protected, or is it not? I know that a lot of states have ruled abortion illegal, but still, it's a issue of pregnancy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not something that I've had to deal with in our practice, but I think that it certainly could be, right? Um, even if it's not specifically related to pregnancy, there are laws protecting certain things that would qualify as a quote unquote disability under the law, right? And so maybe that's not always the best term to use, but if something qualifies as a disability under the law, then there are certain protections, right? Whether if you need certain accommodations or to take a certain amount of a time off from work, right? If your employer is large enough, if you're dealing with a larger employer, they may be covered by the Family Medical Leave Act that might provide for, up to 12 weeks to be able to take time to care for yourself, right? Um, whether an abortion is something voluntary or something that needs to be done for medical reasons, right? That can also impact whether there might be certain protections provided under the law.
Let's talk a little about what discrimination violations kind of cover. Um, Firing is always the one, it can't be fired, but is hiring, are there protections about hiring, about how much you pay, what kind of job you're allowed to do?
Yeah, so there are protections for hiring, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes proving that like a failure to hire claim that they didn't hire you because of some sort of unlawful reason might be very difficult to prove. But some of that can be gleaned from the interview process or what they're asking you, right, in the hiring process, right? Asking you how much you were paid at your previous job, right? That can be inappropriate and not supposed to ask about that, right? Because typically there's been a gender gap between, typically men being paid more than women for performing the same sort of work, right?
Yeah,
So asking about salary could be a way to, you know, keep a woman at a more deflated salary, right? So and asking about, if someone's asking about the fact that, oh, well, are you pregnant now, right? Those sort of things are not appropriate for a an application hiring process, right? If it's something that the applicant decides to on her own bring to the attention of the employer for whatever reason, that it's certainly her choice to do that. But for the employer to sort of push for this information is not appropriate and could then show that if the person didn't get the job, it could be something that contributes to, hey, look, this denial was for an unlawful reason.
yeah. What about employers who retaliate against an employee who are just exercising their rights? I mean, you mentioned parental leave. They may have a right to um, be off for, like you said, pregnancy and stuff. Um, how does that fit in if a employer is just basically saying, well, I'm not going to allow you to go, or something like that?
Yeah, then there certainly could be claims there, right? Like I mentioned earlier, the Family Medical Leave Act provides for if your employer has, X amount of employees, 75 employees over in a 50-mile radius, right? They're a larger employer, then you've been there for over a year, you have protections under the Family Medical Leave Act or the FMLA. And so, if an employer of that size tries to discriminate against an employee or prevent them from taking that sort of leave, there are interference claims, right? You're interfering with my right to take this sort of
Yeah,
leave. Um, but again, there's additional protections under disability laws, right? Even if you don't fit into someone who's protected under the Family Medical Leave Act, maybe you have protections under the disability laws, which provide for you, again, as an accommodation, maybe to have a certain amount of time off from work to be able to deal with, you know, um, whatever sort of medical issue you're dealing with. So. Um, you do see retaliation, and retaliation sometimes tends to be more common than even the underlying discrimination sort of claims, right?
yeah,
Because an employer will get this complaint, we don't want this quote unquote squeaky wheel or, have to deal with this. we're just going to get this person out of here and keep going with what we're doing. Well, you can't do that, right? That's unlawful. But very, very important is for employees to understand when that's happening, and it can be difficult to do that, right? Because if you announce your pregnancy, for example, at work, and then all of a sudden your best clients, your top projects, those are now going to someone else. You're being given more like menial work. Maybe you're being excluded from meetings. Maybe, you've had stellar performance reviews, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5 consistently over, years or months. If it's not a formal performance feedback, informal positive performance, and then all of a sudden you're a 3 or a 2, and you're not performing well, and you're being micromanaged, right? Those sort of changes should flick a light switch and cue the employee to understand, like, hey, there might be something going on here. And the most important thing to do in that instance is to reach out to someone like me, an employment lawyer, who can help you, right? Explain your rights, explain what you need to do to make sure you're putting in a protected complaint. Because if that's happening and you make a complaint, you now have maximized your sort of protections under the law, right? If you just complain, like I said, like, hey, Bob down the hall ever, not treating me well, not getting along. There's a lot of friction recently, but there's nothing about the fact that you believe all that is related to the fact that you're pregnant,
Right.
then, you might think that it's obvious, but being able to spell it out and say things the right way is critical to triggering those protections.
Yeah, imagine it's the same for age discrimination.
Exactly, right? If you like we said, if you're, hey, new company initiative, time for a fresh start and new faces, and and we're bringing in people that are now making these inappropriate comments about older workers and how they can't keep up or should retire, right? If you put in same thing, a complaint to HR, supervisor, hey, listen, like, ABC person has made these comments. We're noticing that older workers are being treated differently. There's been a pattern of older employees being fired recently, right? I worked with all these people and now they're not here anymore. Putting that in a written complaint, it could be verbal, but obviously it's better to have something in writing. Can really go a long way to protecting you should something bad happen.
Yeah. And obviously it's like, I know people are afraid, well, if I complain, they're just going to fire me. But, that's sort of the cause and effect. You've put in the
Yeah.
claim, and if they fire you, it's at their peril.
Yeah, and that's often some of the biggest pushback that we get for people who are understandably on the fence about pursuing legal action, right?
Yeah.
How's this going to impact my life? How's this going to impact my career? Will I be blacklisted in the industry? Well, we can certainly talk about those things, and maybe there's some legitimacy. Oftentimes there's not, right? Almost all of our clients, after they've been fired in these sort of unlawful employment situations, have been able to get new jobs, move on with their careers. But on the other side, get them to understand, well, what are you now missing out on if you're not doing something, right?
Yeah.
The time that it took you to get a job, it can sometimes be a long time in certain job markets, right?
Yeah.
Year could be a year plus, maybe a couple of months, right? During that time, if you were unlawfully terminated, you should have gotten your salary. You should have gotten your commissions. You should have got whatever other compensation you were entitled to during that period of time, right? Obviously, the unlawful termination would be very difficult emotionally. The law recognizes that. And you could be entitled to certain compensation for that, right? So, you know, and again, you don't have to pursue legal action, but speaking to someone and understanding your rights and then making the best choice for you is the smartest way to do it. And if you ultimately decide to pursue action, then find someone who you trust that's able to fight strong on your behalf.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those um, kind of things we talk to our clients about, when they're going through a really complicated divorce, is like, yeah, I understand that your brother-in-law is an attorney, but this is a specialty, and employment law is a specialty, and you just don't want to get necessarily someone who, oh, I think I know something about that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm not gonna pretend to do family law, right? I would pass that on obviously to you. But it is so specialized that you should be really speaking to an expert in the field so that you're getting, the full sort of protections you deserve.
Yeah. We're almost running out of time, but I just kind of want to ask if, let's say I came in and I said, I think I'm being discriminated against, and I think it's because I'm old. Second, which is true. And what should I do? I mean, I don't know if I want to do anything yet, but I mean, you know, how should I act? What should I do? I mean, what sort of tips could you give to say, okay, if you're going to want to make a case, start doing this?
Yeah, so I mean there are sort of general things that maybe you could do, but I would like highlight the most important thing is to call an employment attorney
Yeah,
because I can give you general like guidelines now, but if you call me and I understand your specific situation, I can now tailor that to you to what's going on for you, right? I can understand, did this just
absolutely.
happen? Is this, are we close to a possible termination? Do you need to do something immediately? But generally, you're going to want to put in a protected complaint. If you
Yeah,
legitimately think that you're feeling or experiencing discrimination, hey, I am being discriminated against because of my age. Here are the reasons why. What are we going to do about it?
yeah,
Right? Now, obviously you need to speak to a lawyer who can help you make sure that that's protected under the law. But by doing that, you gain these protections. So if you send something's off, or even if you feel like because this is what happens. Employers, they don't just, hey, the day you announce that you're pregnant or the day that you reach a certain age, you're fired, right? It's going to be over weeks or months where they build a record of supposed poor performance, right? Setting standards that are unrealistic to paper a termination to be like, hey, listen, no, it was this. It was the performance, not the fact that you're now 50 or you're now 60 or you're pregnant. So being able to take sort of immediate action and not just wait and see is the most
yeah,
important thing I would say.
yeah, yeah. Real quick question, and I hate to ask these at the very end because maybe they're not real quick. Uh, you've talked about a protected complaint. Is there a definition of that? Is it have to be in a certain form, in a certain this, or is it just sort of have to go to a certain person?
Yeah. So I mean, there doesn't necessarily need to be like specific words, right?
Okay.
But it needs to be clear that you're complaining about something that is protected, right?
Yes.
So, maybe in sort of a legalese sort of way, I believe that I am suffering pregnancy discrimination in violation of this law, right? Obviously, the layperson is not gonna say something like that. Hey, ever since I told, Jim down the hall, my supervisor, that I'm having a child in a couple months or I'm due, in February 2025, right? There's been a lot of changes going on.
Yeah.
And then explaining, why you think that, right?
Yep.
The changes in the way you're being assessed in your performance, right? Jobs, projects, clients being taken away from you, inappropriate comments about like, well, how long are you going to be out for maternity leave or, when are you going to come back? It's going to be so difficult for us here without you, um, making sure that you're explaining why. But again, if you're and you need to send that to someone who can do something about it, right? A supervisor, HR, right? If you're sending it to your best friend who's at the same level as you, not someone who can do something about it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yep.
so making sure that those are checked off.
I love that. And I love what you said was, there's not just one form, and they're probably specific to what's going on. And so the best thing to do is just come to you first, and you can tell them, what's
Yeah.
going on. They tell you, and you said, okay, then let's, make sure you say this and that and this and that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, oftentimes I'll say, "Hey, give me a draft of what you're thinking to send," and then I can work with them back and
Yeah.
forth to tailor it and make sure that it's what it needs to be, right? And why not do that, right? Why
Oh,
why
yeah.
not take and we offer that we do free consultations and we'll do free complaints for people. not everyone does that, but we think that that's important for people to gain these sort of protections before something bad might happen.
Yep. Yep. And a little bit of legalese isn't always that bad when
No,
that
no.
on that letter, because they're going to look at it and go, "Well, you saw a lawyer."
It could help, right? But
It
again,
could. Oh
speaking
my
to a
gosh.
lawyer
Well,
will help you figure that out.
that's exactly right. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for being here today to talk about just combating workplace discrimination, especially you're geared it toward navigating family law matters, and that's really wonderful. You did it in a way that even I can understand, which is a challenge sometimes. And well, before we go, finally, if someone wants to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, the best way is to visit our website, right? Crabillawfirm.com, Crabill lawfirm.com. Through there, you can book a, again, free consultation, whether you, and we typically do, video Zoom consultations, but you can also call into our office, 727-335-1030, and we can schedule a consultation call that way. But those are the two easiest ways to get in touch with us and set something up.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, it was great. And everyone else, thank you for joining us today. If anyone has any further questions on today's topic, you can also post it here. You can get connected with Taylor, but if you post it here, we will make sure that gets connected with him as well.